Hi, welcome to Moonlit Love Stories. I'm recording today from beautiful Bali, and I honestly couldn't wait to tell you this story. The moment I read it, I was hooked. It starts with betrayal, family, and a love twisted into something almost cruel. A twin sister, one husband, and a place that was stolen, and our heroine doesn't even survive the first night. So let's begin. My twin sister fell in love with my husband and together with my family killed me. She disguised herself as me, sitting shyly on my bed, waiting to share his chambers. My parents, too, hoped she and my husband would live in perfect harmony, like music and strings entwined, blessed with countless children and grandchildren. When my husband pushed the door open and stepped inside, my sister flushed red and moved forward to help him remove his outer robe. What she didn't know was that the man standing before her was even more terrifying than she could ever be. I drifted in the air and watched Peiji push the door open. His iron armor was stained with blood and dust. We hadn't seen each other for 2 months. He had grown thinner, yet somehow even sharper and more striking than before. My sister, Song Rushu, nervously clutched her skirt. After a moment of steeling herself, she rose from the bed, walked to his side, and in a soft, submissive manner offered to attend to him, helping him undress and prepare for his bath. Her voice sounded almost identical to mine, but our voices had never been the same. 7 days ago, when I was on the verge of death, she had proudly told me how much suffering she had endured just to reshape her voice, asking whether it now sounded like mine. Of course it did. Even someone as cautious as Peiji hadn't noticed that the woman before him was no longer his wife. Peiji removed his armor and spread his arms, wordlessly allowing her to serve him. Song Rushu flushed red, her slender, pale hands reaching to untie his belt. She hadn't been born fair either. Yet to match my complexion, she had taken whitening medicine every single day for 2 years and avoided the sun entirely. In the end, she became as pale as me. Not only her voice and skin, she had copied my expressions, my gestures, even my habits perfectly. She said she had spent 2 whole years preparing. She said she was determined to succeed no matter what. As Peiji looked down at her, he noticed something different and questioned the change in the incense she used. Song Rushu paused for a split second, then gently explained that she had switched it and carefully asked whether he liked the new scent. He frowned, clearly displeased, and told her the fragrance was too heavy, far inferior to the one she used before, ordering her to change it back. She immediately obeyed. Peiji turned and headed toward the bath. Song Rushu hurried after him, unconcealed delight in her eyes. She hadn't been exposed. Naturally, she was thrilled. I didn't want to follow them to the bath because I knew exactly what would happen next. Peiji had entered the army at 12. 13 years had passed since then. His blood ran hot, and even his desires in bed were fiercer than ordinary men's. I didn't know whether any women had attended him during these 2 months away, but every time he returned after being gone for days, I would be left utterly overwhelmed. He never pitied me. Instead, he would casually remind me that my parents had sent me here to please him, implying that I hadn't been trying hard enough. Later, the old nurse advised me to be more accommodating and obedient. Only after I followed her advice did his temper soften a little. But originally, the one meant to marry Peiji had been Song Rushu. That year, when he returned to the capital from the northern border with his army, 5 human heads had hung from his saddle. Although he claimed to the emperor that they were merely bandits he had killed along the way, anyone with eyes knew those heads belonged to the 5 families that had impeached the Pei clan years ago. Our Song family was one of them. Because of that impeachment, the Pei family had suffered rivers of blood. Peiji naturally wanted revenge, so the 5 families offered priceless jewels and incomparable beauties, hoping to calm his fury. Song Rushu was that incomparable beauty. Terrified that Peiji would torture her to death, she begged our parents not to send her. Our parents loved her dearly. In the end, they sent me in her place. Though we were twins, when we were born a diviner had predicted that one of us would bring ruin upon the Song family. I, the quiet baby who didn't cry, was labeled the omen of disaster. They had planned to drown me. Mother couldn't bear it. She threatened her own life, and I survived. Still, I was locked away in the deepest courtyard of the estate, raised only by an old nurse. From then on, the outside world knew only the cherished legitimate daughter of the Song family, Song Rushu. No one knew there was another daughter called Song Ali. growing like a weed in that cramped little yard. The family never even gave me a name. Ollie was the one the nurse chose. She said that the day she carried me into the courtyard, the pear blossoms were in full bloom, the most beautiful sight she had ever seen, so she named me after them. Ollie, a name that also sounded like parting. It suited my short life all too well. My soul drifted uncontrollably to the edge of the bath. Paige had already entered the pool, leaning back against the stone edge as steam curled around him. Old scars crisscrossed his body in savage patterns. When Song Rushu saw them, her gaze faltered for a moment, fear flashing in her eyes. She was afraid. I found it laughable. When she killed me, she hadn't shown even the slightest hesitation. I floated to Peiji's side and waved my hand in front of his eyes. Though I had always feared him a little, now I desperately wished he could sense me, or realize that the woman beside him wasn't me at all. My corpse was still buried in the Song family garden, not by ants and worms. If he would avenge me for the sake of the 3 years we had shared, I would be grateful. If not, digging me up and burning me to ashes would be fine too. I liked warmth. I didn't want to lie forever in the dark, but he felt nothing. He simply closed his eyes to rest. Song Rushu steadied her breathing, bit her rosy lip, and slowly prepared to step into the bath. Peiji suddenly opened his eyes and looked straight at her. Caught off guard by his gaze, Song Rushu softly asked why he was staring at her like that. Peiji calmly mentioned that he had heard that during the days he was away, she had returned to the Song family. Song Rushu immediately dropped to her knees and hurriedly explained that her mother had fallen ill, so she had gone back for a few days to visit, pleading for his forgiveness. At the mention of mother, my heart still ached uncontrollably. Back then, she had risked her life to protect me and forced the family to spare me. Yet later, when Song Rushu wanted to be with Peiji, she tricked me into returning home and let Song Rushu poison me. I wanted to ask her why she loved me yet still killed me. After hearing Song Rushu's explanation, Peiji simply said that since her mother was sick, returning home was understandable and not a fault. I froze. He had never spoken to me in such a tone before. On our wedding night, he had told me that since my parents had given me to him, I belonged to him completely and could no longer have a self of my own. Alive I was his, dead I was still his. I was meant to endure his temper and bear his cruelty. That night, he had gripped my chin and coldly warned me that even if my face looked pitiful enough to stir sympathy, I should never expect even a shred of mercy from him. He had said it, and he had meant it. In the 3 years of our marriage, aside from matters in bed, he rarely spoke to me at all, much less allowed me to return home. Song Rushu thanked him gently for his leniency, then rose and walked to his side, picking up a cotton cloth to wipe his body. Just then, the voice of his attendant came from outside, urgently announcing that the Son of Heaven had summoned him at once. Peiji acknowledged it and immediately got up to leave. Song Rushu stared at his departing back and stamped her foot in frustration, annoyed that the imperial summons had come at the worst possible time. After returning to the room, she spun around in delight, unable to contain her excitement. At that moment, my former maid, Year, entered carrying tea and congratulated her for successfully fooling Peiji. Year had been sent by the Song family 2 years ago, after the old nurse who raised me passed away. Back then, I had thought my family finally cared about me. Only now did I realize she had been placed there to prepare for Song Rushu to replace me. They had planned my death 2 years in advance. Song Rushu pulled Year closer and asked her to smell her clothes, wanting to know what scent lingered on her. After sniffing carefully, Year said that aside from the faint fragrance of pear blossoms, there was no other smell. Song Rushu still looked uneasy. She muttered that Peiji had only come close for a moment yet had somehow detected the agarwood incense she used before. I didn't understand either. Peiji had never been particularly skilled with fragrances. How had he noticed the difference so quickly? Year guessed that the old agarwood incense had been very strong, and its scent hadn't fully faded yet. If she burned pear blossom incense for a few more days, it would probably cover everything completely. That seemed to reassure Song Rushu. She lit several more sticks of pear blossom incense, then took out a small doll and began stabbing it with a needle, muttering a vicious curse, wishing eternal damnation and no reincarnation. My name Song Ali was written on the doll. The sorcerer who had taught her this curse must have been a fraud. She stabbed it again and again, yet I felt absolutely nothing. After a while, she began talking to the doll as if speaking to me. She said that I shouldn't feel unfortunate, because I had already enjoyed 3 years by Peiji's side. She admitted that when she looked at him earlier, he seemed like a divine general descended from the heavens, far better than the bookish scholar our parents had once arranged for her, better than any man in the world. After I married Peiji, she could no longer live openly as Song Rushu. Our parents hid her away in a secluded place and even arranged for a scholar to be her husband. As for that scholar's fate now I could guess. He was probably dead just like me. She twisted the doll's head and declared that I should be thanking her. If not for her, how could I ever have married Peiji and enjoyed his person, his power and his wealth? Now, she said, everything was simply returning to its rightful owner. Once she had feared Peiji so much that she made me marry in her place. But after seeing that I had survived a whole year by his side, and watching him rise step by step to the center of the court, her feelings changed. She fell for him all over again. So obsessed she couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, almost mad with longing. Then she asked Year how often Peiji had shared a bed with me. Year replied that unless he was away on official business, he had almost always spent his nights in my quarters whenever he stayed at the manor. Song Rushu shot her an annoyed look, dismissing it coldly. She insisted that even after 3 years of favor, I still hadn't borne him a single child, which only proved that Peiji had merely used me to relieve boredom. She was right. Peiji had told me himself not to even think about carrying his child, so I had always taken medicine. I didn't want to bring a child into the world only for it to suffer the same fate as me. Night gradually deepened, yet Peiji still hadn't returned. Exhausted from waiting, Song Rushu fell asleep first and told Year to wake her the moment he came back. I drifted out of the room and sat on the roof, gazing toward the direction of the imperial palace. A few days ago, I had heard that the Son of Heaven was gravely ill. Being summoned into the palace at a time like this likely meant Peiji would be entrusted with power in a moment of crisis. When that happened, he would stand above 10,000 men, second only to the emperor. I wondered whether he would finally make a move against the Song family. These past few years he had already been restless. The Song family and the other 4 families thought that offering mountains of treasure and beautiful women would make him forget old grudges. But how could such things ever compare to the hatred in his heart? The day I returned to the Song residence, I had intended to warn them about Peiji's intentions. Before I could even open my mouth, they poisoned me. The moon slowly sank, the east grew pale, and the sun began to rise. I had no choice but to hide back inside. I was a ghost. I feared sunlight, feared the very sunlight I once loved most. Peiji returned at noon. Song Rushu had prepared a whole table of dishes to welcome him. I shrank into a corner, listless. I was hungry too. In the half-month before my death, I had no appetite at all. Every bite made me nauseous. Later, when I arrived at the Song house, I hadn't even eaten before drinking the poisoned wine she handed me. In a way, I had become a starving ghost. Song Rushu had barely eaten these past few days from anxiety while waiting for him. Now that he was finally beside her, her appetite returned. But Peiji didn't touch his chopsticks. He simply looked at her with a measuring gaze, his fingers lightly rubbing together, a habitual gesture he made when thinking. Had he discovered something? Song Rushu noticed his stillness and gently asked why he wasn't eating. Instead of answering, Peiji remarked that she seemed to have quite a good appetite. She immediately realized her mistake. She was supposed to imitate my quiet, meek manner. She set down her chopsticks and lowered her head, acting embarrassed. Peiji then mentioned that he had heard she hadn't been feeling well last month, and that an imperial physician would come later to examine her. A flash of panic crossed Song Rushu's eyes. She was afraid the physician might detect something. After all, appearances could be altered, but the body's subtleties could not. I was puzzled too. Last month I had still been alive. The one he referred to as unwell was clearly me. Though I had fallen ill a few times during these 3 years, it had always been the Pain family's own doctors who treated me. Why was he suddenly summoning an imperial physician? Why did he care so much about my health? No matter how unwilling she was, Song Rushu didn't dare defy him. She kept questioning Year about what symptoms I had shown last month. After thinking, years said I hadn't really had any serious problems. Just a loss of appetite, feeling sick whenever I ate meat, but nothing major overall. Song Rushu's expression turned grave, saying it almost sounded like pregnancy. My heart jolted, but that was impossible. I had never stopped taking the medicine. Ye reassured her that even if I had been pregnant, it wouldn't matter. I was already dead, and the dead told no tales. She was right. Even if I had carried a child, it would only have been 2 months at most. Even if my body were dug up, who could tell? The imperial physician arrived right on time. After checking Song Rushu's pulse, he stepped aside with Peiji. I drifted over to listen. The physician stated that she was not pregnant, so Peiji really had suspected I might be. That was why he cared. If I truly had been carrying his child, he could have dealt with it early. Peiji only gave a faint acknowledgement. The physician, thinking Peiji wanted heirs, added that her pulse was steady and healthy. If he hoped for children, there would surely be good news this year. Peiji's gaze shifted slightly as he confirmed again whether her body was truly healthy. After receiving a firm answer, he looked toward Song Rushu in the distance and calmly ordered a servant to inform the Song residents that tomorrow he would accompany her back to visit her family. In the 3 years we were together, he had never once gone to the Song house of his own accord. Even when my parents visited, he barely received them. Still, he probably hadn't discovered anything. If he had truly realized the Song family deceived him, with his methods, they would already have been wiped out. When Song Rushu learned he was going to the Song residence, she grew uneasy, briefly worrying that he had seen through her, but she quickly reassured herself that if he had, she would already be dead. It must have been something the physician said that stirred his suspicions, so she immediately sent people to investigate. She was clever. Children raised in a great noble family like the Song were never fools. Early the next morning, the carriage set out for the Song residence. The spring sun was harsh. I could only hide inside Peiji's shadow as I drifted along beside the carriage. He was tall, and within his shadow I wasn't burned at all. I had never imagined that one day I would need his protection like this. When we arrived, my parents were already waiting at the gate, greeting Peiji with eager flattery. Mother took Song Rushu's hand, worry filling her eyes. My chest tightened. In all my memories, she had never looked at me like that. Even on the day I married Peiji, knowing I might die, her eyes had still been bright with happiness. Happy that Song Rushu could live. Back then I couldn't understand it. I kept believing that since she had once risked her life for me, she must have loved me too. Floating beside her now, I silently asked why. If she had been willing to save me, she still insisted on killing me instead of letting us switch back. But she couldn't hear me. When I was alive, she ignored my pleas. Why would she remember me now that I was dead? Her heart and eyes held only Song Rushu. Father tactfully asked why Peiji had come at such a tense political time. He should have been in the palace. Peiji casually replied that spring was beautiful and the Song family gardens were famous, so he had come to enjoy the scenery. I knew that wasn't his true purpose. Still, I forced myself to stay alert, because my body was buried somewhere in that garden. My parents probably hadn't moved it yet. The Song family was large, with too many eyes and mouths. Any careless move might expose them. Peiji strolled leisurely through the garden, Song Rushu nervously following beside him. Mother gently patted her hand, as if to comfort her. Father tried discussing court affairs, but Peiji didn't respond. Instead, he plucked a begonia blossom and tucked it into her hair. Song Rushu's eyes lit up. Then she lowered her head shyly. My parents smiled in relief. He used to pin flowers in my hair too, not because he liked me. I was simply one of his possessions. Dressing me up when he was bored amused him. Or perhaps making me look more pleasing before using me helped him enjoy himself more. She thanked him softly and sweetly. Peiji only smiled and continued forward. Ahead was the place where I had been buried, beneath that patch of flowering shrubs. But when I drifted closer, I could no longer sense my body. The soil had clearly been turned over recently. They had moved it, probably last night. In the end, they hadn't dared to gamble. Peiji had crawled out of piles of corpses. They feared he might notice something. But where was I now? Suddenly the wind rose. Countless pear blossoms blew through the air, carrying a cold fragrance. Pear blossoms fell like snow, half of spring already gone. Peiji followed the drifting petals with his eyes. At the far end of the garden stood a small courtyard, a pear tree inside it blooming with luminous white flowers. He began walking that way. Father and mother hurriedly tried to stop him, saying there was nothing worth seeing there. Peiji replied lightly that he had never seen such pure pear blossoms, and that taking a look wouldn't hurt. Song Rushu immediately pretended to feel faint, claiming the heat was too much and she needed to rest. Seeing her pale face and sweat on her brow, Peiji hesitated, then left with her. Watching my parents' expressions, I knew my body had to be in that courtyard. Inside the room, mother stayed with Song Rushu while she rested. Father led Peiji to a quiet pavilion for tea. Song Rushu asked in a low voice whether that disaster star, meaning me, had really been pregnant. Mother nodded and calmly told her that the night before, they had cut open my abdomen and confirmed that there had indeed been a child. At those words my stomach began to ache, as if my soul itself had been split open. I hadn't known. I truly hadn't known that I was pregnant. After taking so much medicine for so long, I had believed my body could no longer bear children. Song Rushu sounded relieved, saying it was fortunate they had acted first. Otherwise, once my pregnancy showed, she would never have been able to continue pretending to be me. Mother agreed and reminded her that Peiji had treated her well today. She urged her to seize the opportunity and conceive a child as soon as possible. Once she had a child, even if Peiji discovered something was wrong, he might let it pass for the child's sake. Year added that she had bribed the imperial physician to ask questions. According to him, Peiji had only inquired about her health and nothing more. Song Rushu grew displeased, muttering that he wasn't concerned about her at all. He had only cared about that disaster star. Mother comforted her, saying I was already dead and from now on Peiji belonged to her alone. She reminded her how he had even placed a flower in her hair today, and promised that in the future they would live in love together, with countless children and grandchildren. Only then did Song Rushu smile, saying she finally felt happy. Mother looked at her tenderly and said that as long as her precious daughter was happy, that was all that mattered. I didn't watch any longer. I drifted out. But where could I go? When I was alive, I couldn't return to my birth family and couldn't fit into my husband's home. Now that I was dead, I still couldn't be free. That night, Song Rushu waited for Peiji again, just like the night before. But Peiji remained in the wind pavilion drinking. In the past, that would have relieved me. If he drank himself drunk, I could sleep peacefully. Now it only felt strange. He had pinned a flower in her hair during the day. Why wasn't he coming at night? I drifted to the pavilion. He sat there holding a cup, yet hadn't taken a sip. His retainer, Zhou sat with him. Zhou said that Peiji's visit to the Song residence today, and the show of marital harmony in front of so many people would make the port believe the Pei and Song families were united. That would isolate the Song family from Pei's enemies and prevent them from posing any threat. So that was the real reason he had gone. I had thought he suspected something about Song Rushu. I had overthought it. Zhou kept discussing court matters, but Peiji seemed distracted. Zhou noticed and asked if something was troubling him. Peiji said that a few days ago he had a dream. In it, his wife stood across a river with a small child. Pear blossoms bloomed beautifully behind them. He called out to her, but she ignored him. Zhou laughed and said it was probably just the mind reflecting daily thoughts. Perhaps he simply wanted a real family. But Peiji shook his head. He said that on the day his parents and family died, he had dreamed of them standing across a river too. No matter how he called, they couldn't hear him. Zhou quickly tried to comfort him, saying he shouldn't overthink it. After all, his wife was perfectly fine at home. It was only a dream. Peiji finally took a sip of wine and said maybe it was just a dream. After a long silence, he ordered Zhou to keep an eye on the Song family. Her returning home for several days and suddenly being perfectly healthy was suspicious, and the Song family seemed to be hiding something today. After Zhou left, I sat across from Peiji and quietly watched him. If I still had a body, I would never have dared look at him like this. He had dreamed of me and a child beneath pear blossoms. When I died, when the child died, had he felt something? Had he ever cared about me at all? The night wind blew gently. Insects chirped. Moonlight stretched thin shadows across the ground. He drank his wine. I had no shadow. After a long while, he finally stood and walked towards Songrush's courtyard. But she had already fallen asleep, leaning against the bed with a faint smile still on her lips. She wasn't good at waiting, when waiting for someone, especially someone who held the power of life and death over you. You wouldn't dare fall asleep. Year tried to wake her, but Peiji waved a hand and quietly told her to let her sleep. Songrushi truly was a lucky star. Even disguised as me, she instantly received what I had never obtained. I wanted to enter Peiji's dream and tell him that I was buried beneath the pear tree at the Song residence. But I didn't know how. He was asleep now, his brows tightly knit as if trapped in a nightmare. During those 3 years I had seen that expression many times. Sometimes he even cried in his sleep. Whenever I tried to wake him, he would immediately snap awake and seize my throat. Only after recognizing me would he let go. He had once warned me never to touch him while he slept, because he might kill me. I had been afraid for a long time, until I later heard that he had survived countless assassination attempts in the northern border. No wonder he never slept peacefully. I hesitated, then cupped his face with both hands and pressed my forehead to his, thinking maybe I could enter his dream that way. But it still didn't work. For someone so alert, he didn't even twitch an eyelid. These past few days I had tried to find others, living people or even other ghosts, but it seemed I was bound to Songrushu. Whenever I drifted too far from her, some invisible force dragged me back. I didn't know what else she had done to me. Was I meant to be trapped like this forever? Just as I lifted my head to leave, Peiji suddenly rolled over and pulled me into his arms. I had no body, yet somehow it felt as though he could hold me. Then he woke. He stared at the empty space in his arms, stunned for a moment. His throat moved, his breathing gradually calming. Then I heard him murmur to himself, telling himself not to be bewitched. In this twisted marriage of ours, he had always been the sober one. Even on those countless nights when it felt like he wanted to carve me into his very bones, once dawn broke, he would return to being the cold, unshakable prince of the north, and I was nothing more than the Song family's daughter in his household. Before dawn, people from the palace arrived again, saying the Son of Heaven had suddenly awakened. Peiji entered the palace. Not long after, the funeral bells began to toll. The emperor had passed away. The entire nation mourned. The new emperor was young, and Peiji assumed regency. 13 years ago, he had worn shackles and been exiled to the northern frontier camps. 13 years later, he stood at the very top, walking over mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Then he began a ruthless purge. Of the 5 great families from back then, only the Song family remained. There were jokes in the streets. People said the Zhu, Wang, Luo, and Xia families shouldn't have offered treasures back then. They should have offered beauties instead. They said jewels were vulgar things. Only people carried true feeling. Someone claimed they had once seen the lady herself, said she was so delicate and lovely that anyone would pity her. No matter how cold-hearted the Prince of the North might be, how could he resist a beauty's tender devotion? Others whispered that whenever the prince was home, he practically never left the lady's bed. When I heard these words, Mother was praising Songrushu. She told her she was now the most honored woman in the world, that even the Empress Dowager could not compare to her. Songrushu sounded uninterested. She said what was the point of honor when she hadn't seen him for over a month. Mother told her to be patient, said he was busy with state affairs and would return once things settled. Songrushu worried that another woman might take her place during this time. Mother laughed and said that even if someone did appear, Father and Mother would remove her for her. Songrushi said softly that Mother treated her so well. Mother replied that if she didn't treat her own daughter well, who else would she treat well? She called her the precious treasure she had raised with her own hands. I stared at them blankly, because I hadn't grown up by her side. Was I just someone who could be eliminated at will? Songrushu then asked about the condition of my corpse. Mother said they hadn't dug it up again, but it had probably already rotted away and become nourishment for the pear tree. I lowered my head and looked at my feet. She was probably right. A few days ago my feet had started turning transparent. I thought I was beginning to fade away. I didn't know why I was still lingering in this world, or how long I could remain. I didn't even know why, after being dead for so long. No soul reapers had come to take me. 2 more days passed. Finally, Peiji was returning. Song Rushi dressed carefully in front of the mirror. She admired her reflection and asked Yer whether in the past he had come here on his own and whether I had never taken the initiative to invite him. Yer said yes. Song Rushu let out a dismissive snort and said I must have been quite capable after all. She had underestimated me before. Yer suggested she change into something plainer, since I rarely wore such bright colors. Song Rushu's face turned cold. She said I was me and she was her. She would wear whatever she liked. Yer hesitated. Song Rushu turned and reminded her that it had already been 2 months and that Song Oli was turning into bones. There was nothing to worry about. Not long ago I had thought she was clever. Now she seemed foolish. No, she wasn't foolish. She was simply desperate to step out of my shadow. No one wants to live as someone else forever. By evening, Peiji finally arrived. He wore a dark black robe embroidered with golden serpents. Even amid the aura of killing intent, there was an air of nobility about him. He had always been a noble-born son. It was just that blood and hatred had once buried what lay beneath. Song Rushu hurried forward to greet him, her eyes filled with awe and infatuation. She clung softly to him and said she had been waiting for him to come back. Peiji too seemed flushed with power. High position, a beauty in his arms. No man would dislike that. He wrapped an arm around her slender waist. The sharpness in his eyes gradually softened. His voice turned low and hoarse as he said he was back. Then he frowned slightly and asked why she hadn't changed her fragrance yet. Her gaze wavered. She stammered that she had changed it long ago, that after he said he didn't like it, she had never used it again. He studied her thoughtfully but said nothing more. They ate together and then he left. As soon as he was gone, she tore off the jade pendants and scented sachets on her body, complaining that she had used pear fragrance for so long she almost smelled like it herself. So why did he still say the scent was different? She harshly questioned Yer, asking if Yer had lied to her and didn't care whether her family lived or died. Yer immediately knelt and swore she would never deceive her. She asked what else it could be. Yer guessed that maybe it wasn't the pear fragrance but her natural body scent. She had heard everyone had a unique smell. Song Rushu scoffed, saying what pear scent or body scent? Didn't he just look at faces? She already looked almost identical to me, so similar that even she barely recognized herself. She didn't know, and neither did I. He had never mentioned anything about scent to me before. I drifted to Peiji's side. He sat at his desk. In the flickering candlelight, he stared at the inkstone. Once, he had written there while I ground ink beside him. Outside the window were slender bamboo stalks. Whenever the wind blew, the rustle of leaves mixed with the scent of ink. It had been a rare, quiet piece, one of my favorite moments. The wind still blew, the bamboo still rustled, but the one grinding ink was gone. After a while Zhou came. Peiji asked if there had been any discoveries at the Song household. Zhou said everything seemed normal and asked whether he had sensed something. Peiji replied coldly that her scent still wasn't hers. Zhou scratched his head and said that even if her smell changed, it didn't mean the person had changed. Peiji's gaze shifted. He looked at the fresh pears newly delivered to the table, then called someone over and told them to pass a message to Song Rushu that he wanted pear pastries tomorrow, and that she should make them herself. I used to make pear pastries for him. Was he trying to distinguish her through taste? He truly was suspicious. I hadn't expected him to care this much. Perhaps he simply couldn't tolerate being deceived. It didn't matter, as long as my body could be dug up. That pear tree in the courtyard had accompanied me for 17 years. It had grown on sunlight and rain, and its fruit had always been sweeter than my bitter life. It was so good, so pure. Like my nanny, it had raised me. It was a mother too. It shouldn't have to feed on my rotting flesh and bones. When Song Rushu received the message, she grew anxious. She said Peiji had suddenly wanted pear pastries for no reason, and she didn't even know how to make them. Yer told her not to panic. She said she had watched me make them several times before and remembered the method. Song Rushu immediately had her write everything down, then went to the small kitchen to try. She worked through the entire night, ruining ingredient after ingredient, until at last she managed to steam a full batch. Year tasted one and said it was close, almost the same flavor. Only then did Song Rushu finally relax. She washed and dressed, then carried the pear pastries to see Peiji. He picked one up, took a bite, and swallowed it slowly. She asked him eagerly what he thought of the taste. I was eager too, but to be honest, I never even knew whether my own pear pastries tasted good or not. The first time I made them for him was about half a year after we married. He had returned injured and was recuperating. Nanny told me to take care of him. I said he didn't like me and that going would probably only annoy him. Nanny just smiled and told me that in a marriage, every step I took toward him would bring us one step closer. She said men who protected their country couldn't be rotten to the core. She reminded me that I had no parents to shelter me, that life was hard for women, but I could use what I had to build a home of my own. So I went. He truly didn't like me, but he didn't drive me away either. I forced myself to stay close and care for him for half a month, changing his bandages, helping him wash. That was when I made the pear pastries. While he was asleep, I noticed the pears in the manor were ripe and going to waste, so I picked some and steamed them into pastries. I still remember that day. The whole room smelled of pears. My face was flushed and sweaty from the heat when he suddenly appeared and asked what I was making. I lied. I told him he hadn't had much appetite, so I wanted to make something to help him eat. He gave me a half smile and asked if I had put poison in it. I panicked and said I wouldn't dare. To prove it, I immediately took a bite. It burned my mouth so badly I spat it out. For a moment I thought he would kill me, but he didn't. Later, he even ate several pieces himself. Nanny had smiled and said, "See, wasn't that one step closer?" After that, I made pear pastries every year. It somehow became a habit. After Peiji finished that piece, he stared at Song Rushu for a long time. She asked again what he thought. His hand rested on her slender neck. Such intimacy filled her eyes with delight. I felt a little disappointed, so my pear pastries really weren't anything special after all. But the next second, his hand suddenly tightened. His eyes were full of killing intent as he demanded to know who she really was and where Song Rushu had gone. She couldn't breathe. Her face turned red as she clawed at his hand, but her strength was nothing against his. She struggled to say that she was Song Rushu. He repeated the question word by word. Zhou Feng and the others rushed in at the noise and begged him to calm down. They said if he had doubts, he should interrogate her carefully. If he killed her now, he'd learn nothing. Only then did he slowly loosen his grip. She collapsed to the floor, coughing violently, terror written all over her face. But she still insisted she was Song Rushu, and she wasn't lying. She truly was Song Rushu. Peiji looked down at her coldly and asked that since she claimed to be her, then explained how she had arrived frail and sickly, had taken countless tonics without improvement, yet suddenly recovered within just 7 days. He also demanded to know why her scent and her pear pastries were so different from before. Only then did Song Rushu realize that when I married in her place, my body had been weak. I had lived in that courtyard year-round with poor food. How could I have been healthy? But even I didn't understand. Aside from the contraceptive medicine, when had I ever taken tonics? Yet I must have. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been that child. Did Peiji have someone change my medicine? Had he once wanted a child with me? Song Rushu just shook her head and cried that she didn't know what he was talking about. Peiji sneered and said that although she looked similar, she wasn't her. Absolutely not. Then he ordered Zhou Feng to summon my father and mother. He wanted them to identify her. He had the right answer, but the wrong method. Father and mother arrived quickly. They pretended to examine her, then firmly insisted she was Song Rushu. They weren't lying, so Peiji couldn't find any flaw. He didn't know the Song family had another daughter, a daughter who had been married to him for 3 years. Song Ali. Zhou Feng and the others advised him that perhaps he was simply too tired and should rest first. Gradually, Peiji calmed down and walked out. I followed behind him as he moved through the moonlight. This man. I realized I couldn't quite see through him anymore. A person's natural scent, their health, the simple pear pastry. None of that could truly prove someone had been replaced. With his personality, he shouldn't have been so rash. And yet he was so certain. Zhou Feng hurried after him and asked what was wrong. Peiji stopped and asked if he remembered the dream he had mentioned before. Zhou Feng recalled the one where he saw the lady and a small child standing across the river, where no matter how he called out, she wouldn't answer. Peiji nodded slowly. He said that she might already be dead. He said that all his life he seemed unable to hold on to anything. His parents, his siblings, all gone. And her too. Maybe even a child. Then he asked what people even lived for. I drifted in front of him, and in his eyes, I saw sorrow. Zhou Feng denied it again and again, insisting it couldn't be true. He told Peiji not to overthink, that the lady was still the lady, and besides, hadn't the imperial physician already said there would be good news about a child this year? Peiji said nothing more. After a moment, he ordered Zhou Feng to investigate immediately, find out whether Madame Song had given birth to a single child or twins back then. If it had been twins, then everything would make sense. Once he calmed down, he reached that possibility very quickly. But the number of people who knew Mother had delivered twins was extremely small. The sorcerer had long since wandered far away. Nanny was already dead. Only my parents in years still knew. And my parents had prepared for this for years. They wouldn't leave behind any loose ends. Sure enough, Zhou Feng found nothing. The midwife and all the maids who had been present at the birth had died one after another over the years. Perhaps Nanny, too, had been killed by them. Back then, her health had always been poor, so she returned to her hometown to recuperate. Not long after, word came that she had passed away. I had been so heartbroken I could barely get out of bed. Then Year was sent to me. Year and the other servants were interrogated, but nothing useful came out. In the end, Year claimed she couldn't bear the torture and ran herself into a blade, killing herself. Now the only people who knew the truth were my parents and Song Rushu. Song Rushu came to see Peiji wearing the clothes I used to wear and styling her hair the way I used to. She didn't cry or make a fuss. She simply stood there quietly. At that moment she looked the most like me. Even Peiji seemed slightly dazed. She offered him tea and recounted several private matters that only he and I should have known. Those things had happened after Year arrived. It seemed Year had been very good at spying. Peiji listened silently, then suddenly asked that since she remembered everything so clearly, did she still remember what he had said to her on our wedding night? Her eyes tightened. She probably thought revealing those intimate details would convince him. She hadn't expected him to question her. Instead, she said softly that so much time had passed and she had forgotten. But I remembered. He had told me that even if I looked pitiful enough to move others, I should never expect even a shred of pity from him. Peiji let out a cold laugh and told her that if she had forgotten, then she should go think carefully. When she remembered, she could come back and tell him. She fled as if escaping. I heard Zhou Feng and the others whispering that their lord's temperament had truly changed. In the past, he would rather kill the wrong person than let anyone go. Now, because he cared, he didn't dare act rashly. They wondered when he had started caring about the lady. They had never noticed before. Someone said feelings were like quiet rain that soaked into the earth without a sound. Maybe it had begun with something as small as a cup of tea or a bowl of rice. By then my legs had begun to disappear too. Only my long skirts drifted in the air. Judging from how fast I was fading, I probably didn't have many days left. Peiji changed his investigation. He ordered people to search for unidentified female corpses. Alive or dead, he wanted to see me. He said if they couldn't find my body, then it meant I was still alive. The more I watched him, the more I felt he truly wanted to find me, not simply to prove he had been deceived by the Song family. I kept telling him I was buried beneath the pear tree. He still couldn't hear me. Sometimes I thought he was a bit foolish. If he had dreamed of me beneath pear blossoms, why not just dig under the pear tree at the Song residence? Days later, many unidentified bodies were found. There were women, men, even infants. It took Song Rushu to identify them. Mine wasn't among them. When they passed the small bodies of the children, he stopped. Most of them were baby girls. Softly, he said that the child in his dream had been a cute little girl. I touched my stomach. I felt nothing. I had never dreamed. That little girl. I would probably never see her face. She had come without my knowing, and left without my knowing, dying with me. In these 20 years it seemed I had never managed to hold on to anything either. As we prepared to leave, heavy clouds pressed down and a violent storm began to gather. I grew more and more transparent. I thought I was about to scatter completely, knowing the people who killed me were still living freely while I remained buried in darkness. It left a small regret. But I could do nothing. I couldn't turn into a vengeful ghost like in the stories. I knew no spells. I couldn't even drift far. I didn't want to hide in Paige's shadow anymore. So I floated upward to look at the capital city I had always wanted to see but never truly could. Before I died, the last time I was with him, he had been in a good mood. While tying his hair, I had asked if he would let me leave the manor to go out on my birthday. He had said no. Later, before departing, he said we would talk about it when he returned. I knew he had softened. I waited for him with hope. In the end it came to nothing. But it wasn't too late. I decided to treat today as my birthday instead. Song Ollie, 20 years old. Even if I was a starving ghost, at least I had seen the splendor of this world. I was looking down at the city under Paige's rule when sudden commotion erupted below. A crippled beggar had grabbed onto Song Rushu's leg, shouting hoarsely, his face filled with hatred. She panicked and ordered someone to drag him away. Paige, however, stopped them with interest. Soon the truth came out. The beggar was the scholar Song Rushu had once married. After seeing Paige again that year and failing to forget him, she had tried to kill her husband first. But he had survived. He begged his way all the way to the capital, searching street by street until he finally found her today. And just like that, the truth unraveled. Rain poured down. Kneeling in the storm, Song Rushu swore she had originally been the one meant to marry Paige. She said she had never lied. She called me a cursed star, unworthy of him, claiming everything was merely returning to its rightful place. She said we looked identical, that she could serve him better, that he would surely love her. Under the umbrella, Paige murmured my name for the first time. Song Ollie. Then he crouched before her, smiling coldly, and asked that since she was so willing to serve him now, why had she refused to marry him back then? She trembled, unable to answer. He answered for her, because she had been afraid of death, because what you couldn't have always seemed best. She sobbed that it had all belonged to her. My parents begged for mercy, saying everything was their fault. Paige asked them that they could have hidden me somewhere he'd never find and let me live. So why did they insist on killing me? Father said I was a cursed star and deserved to die. Mother said that if he found me, Song Rushu would be sent back. Hearing this, I didn't even feel that sad. Father had many children. My life meant nothing. Mother had raised Song Rushu with her own hands, and everyone called her a lucky star. Of course she favored her more and more. Finally, Paige asked where my body was. The three of them refused to speak. They thought that since I was already dead, he might spare them. But if he knew I had died carrying his child, he would never let them go. Suddenly he realized something. He looked toward the Song residence and rode off at once. He went straight to the pear tree where I was buried. This year the tree had borne no fruit, not a single one. He threw away the umbrella and dug with his bare hands. Zhou Feng and the others rushed to help. Very quickly I saw my body. I hadn't turned to bones yet. I almost looked asleep. Perhaps because I had died of poison, my body hadn't decayed easily. My abdomen had been cut open. It was horrifying. Everyone round turned their faces away. Some even vomited. But Paige didn't flinch. He removed his outer robe, covered me with it, and lifted me into his arms. In the heavy rain, it seemed like he was crying. Or maybe it was only rainwater. Zhou Feng asked how to deal with my parents and Song Rushu. Paige walked up to Song Rushu and crushed her throat bit by bit with his hand. She struggled wildly, then slowly went limp. He told my parents that the cursed star had taken care of her for them. Then he told Zhou Feng that as long as they didn't die, he could do whatever he wanted with them. Zhou Feng nodded. My parents turned pale with terror and begged to be killed outright. I had seen how Zhou Feng handled assassins. 72 punishments one by one, still alive at the end, living worse than pigs or dogs, worse than death. The rain had stopped, and sunlight poured over all of Tiandu City. I whispered in Paige's ear, thanking him, and asked him to cremate me, not bury me in the earth. Of course he could not hear me. I watched him walk farther and farther away, holding me in his arms. Finally I shouted as loudly as I could, Paige, if you ever fall in love again, don't scare her like that. Tell her early, okay? A gust of wind swept through, and the little copper bells on the eaves jingled crisply. I saw Pagey suddenly glance back. He looked toward me in the wind, but in the end he could not see me. I turned and floated beneath the pear tree. It was in full bloom, white petals spilling over every branch. Beneath it sat a small, adorable girl. I asked her who she was waiting for. In her soft, childlike voice she said, "Mama, I'm waiting for you." I paused. Her features were a mixture of mine and Pagey's. Perhaps this was our child. Perhaps this was me, the little version of me who had spent every day sitting under the pear blossoms, hoping for Mama to come. I smiled at her and took her hand. "I'm here. Let's go." She gripped my hand tightly. "Mama, where are we going?" "Anywhere," I said. "The world is vast. We can go wherever we want." The pear blossoms swirled around us like drifting snow. Holding her hand, I saw a beautiful river. Along its banks, people queued up and walked forward. At the front of the line was a place filled with warmth. Just as we neared it, I heard Pagey's voice. "Song Ali." I turned to see him stepping across the river. He wore the dark robe I had always loved to see him in, his hair tied high and whipping in the wind. He came to stand before me and the child, saying, "I called for you before, and you never answered. Turns out I called the wrong name. Oli, I'm glad I'm not too late." For a moment I thought I had slipped into his dream, that I was trespassing into his sleep. But behind him I saw countless soldiers crossing the river, wounded and bloodied, missing arms and legs. He had died in battle. Then he lifted the child and naturally took my hand. "Let's go. Mom and Dad are waiting for us ahead." I looked forward and saw many people waving at us. I saw Mama too, but she seemed upset with me. "Ali, I prayed to the gods for so long to let you live a long life. How could you come so soon?" I finally remembered that at the moment I died, I had heard a voice say, "Give her a little more time. Mama prayed for her every day when she was alive. She needs to see her revenge fulfilled." So it wasn't Song Rushu who kept my spirit lingering. "Mama," I called, my voice trembling. She had raised me, named me, taught me how to live, prayed to the gods for my safety, and waited for me in the end. She was my Mama. Mama cried, and then she laughed. The wind rose again, and the pear blossoms danced like drifting snow. Grass grew, orioles sang across the fields, and the moon shone white over the wind-blown pear trees. "Ollie, let's go."